If you're like many podcasters, you may have considered sponsorship as a strategy to monetize your podcast. Now, there are many ways to attract sponsors, some are better than others. In this episode, I'm joined by Eric Melchor. He's the co-founder of Podk.it, which is a dynamic media kit that podcasters can use to attract sponsors. He also hosts his own podcast and more. So as you can imagine, Eric has a lot of insight around attracting sponsors and networks and podcast advertising. And in this episode, we cover what is a media kit and why should podcasters have one, the exact steps you should take if you want to attract sponsors for your podcast or join a network, what every podcaster should have ready before they even start reaching out to sponsors, practical advice on attracting more of your ideal guests, why you don't need a huge following to get sponsors for your podcast, and much more. So if you're looking to attract sponsors, networks, or even high-profile guests to your podcast, then this is for you. Eric Melchor, thank you for joining me on Podcasting Amplified. How are you doing?
I'm good, Joe. It's good to be here.
Good. So Eric is the co-founder of Podk.it, which is the first dynamic shareable media kit for press pack for podcasters, and he also hosts Innovators Can Laugh, where he interviews European tech founders. And today we're going to be focusing a lot on Podk.it and press packs in general and how podcasters can attract sponsors to their show. So first, before we start talking about press packs or media kits, can you first just briefly explain what one is and why podcasters should have one if they want to attract sponsors?
Yeah, I mean, a media kit is just a great way for potential sponsors, collaborators, maybe even guests can learn, get some more information about your show. Typically, these are done using like PowerPoint slides, maybe a Canva presentation or a PDF. And it has the basic details about your podcast, more information that you would see on somebody's Spotify. For example, it could have audience demographic information, the type of listeners, maybe like the type of job titles of people who listen to your show, the location of listeners, and then any other psychographic information that you want to include. And then also information about yourself. Maybe you want to highlight other things about you, maybe your LinkedIn audience or your X followers or TikTok followers. So it has all this information, not just about your show, but also about you and about your reach. And typically, when people create this, it could be anywhere from maybe, usually 7 to 15 slides. And sponsors generally request this when they're considering sponsoring your show. So a good chunk of podcasters have them. Many of them don't because it takes a while to actually create and keep updated. And that was a problem that was annoying me. And that's why I'm trying to solve it now for other podcasters.
Nice. Yeah. So, because a lot of podcasters I speak with and who we work with, sponsorship is something that's like on the cards. They haven't built a strategy around attracting sponsors yet. It's more just like when the podcast gets to a certain level, then they'll start to reach out to some sponsors. So what would you say to these podcasters if they find a sponsor that they want to reach out to, or maybe they're not sure who could sponsor their show yet? What would be the first step you'd say that they should take in order to sort of reach out to them and then convince them to sponsor their show?
Well, Joe, first, when podcasters say that they're waiting for their numbers to increase and their audience to get bigger, that's a mistake, because it's not really the reach that's important. It's who is listening to your show. I mean, I know another network owner who has a network of horse-related podcasts. Let me repeat that: horse-related podcasts.
Very specific.
So, yes. And he has something like 70 podcasts in his network. And I didn't realize how big of a genre that is. But, people in the horse industry, it's a very specific niche. And some of his podcasts, they only get maybe a few dozen listeners, every week or even every month. But they're very important. It's the same thing with my network. I've got some podcasts under my umbrella that get less than 150 downloads a month. But the listeners happen to be like tech founders based in Europe. And because of that, they're making decisions on the type of tools and products that their company is using. And therefore, it's a very, very valuable audience. So it's not so much about the reach, it's who's listening to your show that really matters. So when podcasters say that, I say, no. I think you've got the wrong view on that. It's who's listening to your show is what matters. So that's the first thing I want to say. And then kind of going back to, I guess, your question about sponsorships in general, well, it's hard to actually go get sponsors and sponsorships, especially when your audience is low. Now, I'm kind of contradicting myself here, but even when I have a podcast and the audience are primarily CEOs and founders of tech companies, but because the audience is kind of small, maybe 300 downloads a month, it doesn't sound that appealing to a media buyer or maybe a marketing officer at a SaaS company. So what I usually suggest is that you find a niche network that has the same kind of genre or represents the same kind of podcast categories as your podcast, and try to collaborate with them, because those networks are out there trying to get business for people like you. That's what I usually recommend to other podcasters. And there's lots of other niche podcast networks. I mean, everything from lawyers, from people who work in oil and gas, from musicians, people who are like me in the B2B marketing space. So there's all kinds. I think there's more than 50 different niche networks out there, and it's growing.
Yeah, and what you're saying about like the quality of the listener or the specificity of the listener rather than the size of the listener base. That's why when we're helping podcasters launch, the first thing we do is talk to them about who's your ideal listener, who's this specific person. Because I feel like there are a lot of podcasters these days that want to talk to so many different people. It would just be like, yeah, we're three guys, we're just talking about general stuff, or talking about movies or whatever, to anyone who will listen. But for a podcast like that, I guess you would need sort of tens of thousands of listeners for it to be attractive to a sponsor. Whereas, like you say, if you have a podcast very specifically on horses, then you'd only need even a dozen like really specific people listening to the podcast for them to be willing to spend money with you.
Exactly.
When you talk about finding a network, I guess this is something that a lot of people haven't thought of as well. They may be thinking about specific brands that they'd like to partner with, or hoping someone will come to them. But could you just tell us a little bit more about podcast networks, like how they operate, how they make their money, and what the benefit of reaching out to a network is over contacting the brand directly, for example?
Yeah, so there's a community of network owners that I'm a part of, and there's different business models out there. And so I can't really cover or let you know what everybody does, but I can tell you what I do. And what I do is I have a different range of the type of reach that B2B marketing related podcasts that they have. And so if they have like from 0 to 300 listeners a month or downloads a month, then this is the standard fee that they'll usually get. I don't work off a CPM model. It's a flat fee, and it's usually based off 4 episodes minimum. And what I do is that's their fee, and then I usually do a markup anywhere from 20 to 30% on top of their fee to handle my operation costs. And so that's how my model works. For other networks, I can tell you another network that I spoke with is where they actually charge the podcast to be a part of their network. And so they charge the podcast to be a part of their network, but usually the podcast makes it back up in the form of sponsorships. And so whenever that network has a suitable sponsor, they will let the podcast know that, okay, we have this sponsor, you're going to, we'd like you to run this ad for X number of weeks on your show, and here's what the compensation is going to look like. And so those are other networks that have a different business model, but kind of the same thing. But I think the underlying thing is that we typically don't work off a CPM model because our podcasts are very niche and we're not generating thousands and thousands of downloads every month. And so therefore we work usually off a flat fee, and it could be a flat fee per episode or a flat fee per, minimum number of episodes. And then also the podcaster has the ability to earn more commission if maybe they have a newsletter. And so if they've got a newsletter and they want to do an inclusion of the advertiser, that's another upsell. Other things like maybe there's a guest fee if they're open to having certain guests on their show where it makes sense for the audience, and they charge a fee for that. That's another upsell. And then maybe they even do like a LinkedIn live event or a live recording. and they want to do sort of like a product placement. So there's not necessarily an ad script, but during the live performance, they naturally or organically start talking about the product, the advertiser's product, and that could, last anywhere from like a minute to maybe 4 or 5 minutes. And that's something that we've done too in our network, and that's another upsell opportunity.
Okay. So having a really specific audience, potentially having an email list, doing live events and things, are there any other things that would make a podcast attractive to a network, would you say? Like if someone's thinking about how to position their podcast to get attention and for it to be worth it for the network to sort of bring them on board, are there any other things?
Yeah, what's important to me is if you have a YouTube channel as well, because there's additional reach that your show can get if you have a YouTube channel. 85% of the podcasters in my network have one. And so we'll actually go out of the way if they're doing an ad campaign with us to actually create a video ad that we can insert into the video podcast. Essentially, that's just an overlay of the audio ad script on top of a video asset that the advertiser provided. But that to me is another big plus. So I definitely want podcasters who have a YouTube channel who it's important to them. I have some podcasters that they're actually YouTube first. That's their primary channel, and they have thousands more subscribers there than they do listeners on Spotify or Apple, and that's great because with YouTube, and I don't have enough data on this just yet, but I believe when you look at the long term, like after the first 30 days, I think YouTube continues, just like audio does, but I think it actually generates more views than, let's say, listens on Spotify after 30 days. The last campaign that we ran, there was maybe, I think, an additional 40, there was an uplift of 40% additional listens on Spotify or audio from day 30 to 90. And YouTube, not all the podcasters had a YouTube channel, but the ones that did, there was an even bigger lift on the YouTube channel. So I think that's very appealing for advertisers as well, and especially if it's an evergreen ad, meaning that you don't take it out. It's always there. And so that's the other thing that I like too, is podcasters that are willing to do evergreen ads on YouTube.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it works better as a search engine, doesn't it? So I agree with that. And would you say that it's worth for audio-only podcasts to also get their episodes up on YouTube in some way?
Oh,
or
absolutely.
Is this specifically just video?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's so easy now. I think there's an RSS feed that you can actually do if you're using Buzzsprout, and the show automatically uploads to YouTube.
Yeah.
You could spend a little bit more time on it like I do, where I'll upload the video, but I'll actually go out to Canva and create a specific YouTube thumbnail for that show and try to play a little bit with the keywords like in the title and in the description. Again, this is maybe an extra, 20 minutes per episode per week, but I think it's worth it. I mean, you're finding new listeners who wouldn't have found you through audio alone or through SEO. They're specifically finding you through that platform. And sure, they may not be as loyal or as dedicated as an audio-only listener because they may get distracted and they may be doing other things while they're watching the YouTube video. And I think that's fine. But if they found you on YouTube first and then start listening to you on audio only, that's great. That's what I did with the Diary of a Young CEO or CEO. I found him through YouTube. I never listened through audio only, but now I would say I'm a fan of the show. And if I'm on a 3 or 4 hour road trip, I probably would listen to him on Spotify versus, I would have never found him on Spotify had I not found him on YouTube.
Yeah. No, it's very easy now, even if you just have like say the automatic RSS feed. I guess it's better than nothing, and it just shows bigger numbers for those sponsors when they're considering you.
Yep.
And then just going back to media kits, full disclosure, I'm not being paid for this episode to host Eric or anything. I just saw what he was doing with Podk.it, and it's just a lot more interesting than some of the other options I've seen for creating sort of press packs or whatever. So I've seen a lot of podcasters use things like Linktree. So if someone's interested in their podcast, whether that's a a guest or a sponsor or just someone listening, they'll send them a link tree, and then it just has a list of, but like a basic list just for the listeners if you haven't used it, a basic list of like, click on here to go to our Instagram, click on here to go into YouTube and stuff. Then some podcasters might put together a PDF showing their sort of top episode numbers and just what the show is about. But with Podk.it, it automatically updates with your numbers. I created mine yesterday in a few minutes, and you can choose which platforms to show your numbers for. So it's like this interactive, automatically updating press pack that you can send to sponsors or guests, and you can start for free. Could you tell us a little bit more about why you started with this? I know you said that you sort of discovered this problem. How has that gone so far, and how did you sort of make the decisions and on what should be on the Podk.it and things like that?
Yeah. So when I first started trying to create a media kit, I was using like PowerPoint slides, taking screenshots of my audience downloads from the different platforms, and putting that on slides and spending a few hours. And then the thing is that your numbers grow, your audience grows, and every couple of months you're trying to update these numbers. So it was very, very time consuming. And one of the members in my podcast community, he told me, because I'm based in Romania, although I'm from Texas, he said, Eric, I'm working with this young developer. He's out of Romania on this other project, but he has this interesting idea for podcasters. And I think it'd be worth a phone call if you can go out and just chat with him. I said, sure. And so we got on the phone, and he had this idea, and he had some wireframes, and he's like, I have this idea for this online media kit because it doesn't exist right now for podcasters. If you Google podcast media kit, they're all listings to take you, to create like a PDF or a hard copy media kit, right? There's nothing for online. And when he mentioned that, I was like, you know what? I'm scratching my head here because this is the same problem I have, but why isn't there like an online version? Something that's dynamic, something that updates automatically, something that's simple to create and you never have to worry about again for podcasters. And so I said, let's do it. And so we partnered up, and now we just wrote out the first version. And just like you said, you have the ability to link your Spotify account, Apple, YouTube, and then even other social platforms like TikTok and X and LinkedIn. You can upload information about past collaborations or sponsorships that you did as well. You can use the little toggle to show what you want to have in terms of your favorite episode and playing in the background for YouTube, or highlight an episode on Spotify that you want to have at the very, very top. And then also choose the order of what information that you want to have. Maybe you want to have Apple on top, and then TikTok, and then LinkedIn, and then Instagram, or whatever. You can rearrange the order as well. So that's the first version that's rolling out. Very, very excited about it. The reception has been pretty good. People have said that, oh, wow, this is easy to create, and I really like this. And so we're happy about it right now, but we've got a lot of plans to make some really good enhancements for the future. So I think going back to what you said, Media Kit, it's important if you want to get sponsorships, because sponsors, that's the one thing they ask for. It's like, what are your numbers? And so whenever I'm working on a sponsorship on behalf of an advertiser, the main thing that I'm sharing with them are the audience numbers and the reach for each of the podcasts that I'm promoting. This automatically shows that, and it updates automatically. So that's like number one, right? And then number two is putting it in a way that is good design. And that's something that I think that we nailed. I think the design aspect is great. When people see it, they're like, oh, wow, this is pretty cool. This looks great. Compared to other things out there that I've seen in the market, I think we have a really good design. And so that's the second thing that impresses, potential advertisers. And then the third thing too is that it's great for any guests that you're pitching. If they want more information about your show, instead of just sending them your link to your Spotify, or where your show's on, you can send them this link. And I think people would be impressed, like, oh wow, this is really, really cool. So I think it impresses potential guests, potential sponsors, and then coming down the road, we're going to make it easy for you to find to utilize AI and it will find, potential sponsors that align with your audience and with your show. And we're going to make it easy for you to connect with them. And so we're just trying to make it super easy to get sponsors for your show that makes sense for your audience.
Nice, thank you. And yeah, one thing I liked about it when I put it together, when I just got sort of started with my one yesterday, was that you can curate your top platforms. So you can choose which top platforms are going to show on your media kit. So for example, my biggest following at the moment is on YouTube and LinkedIn. So I put those two as my two platforms on there. Whereas if you just kind of leave it to the sponsor or leave it to the guest to find out more about you, they might end up on your Instagram or your threads or something, and maybe you don't actually spend any time on there and you've only got sort of 5 followers, and they miss out on the fact that you've got 5,000 on YouTube or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Joe. I didn't think about that. But yeah, quite often people go to Google or they do some kind of search, or maybe they're searching on TikTok and they're like, oh, this guy's got 10 followers. That would be me. I created an account one time, maybe uploaded a couple of videos and that's it. But that's the worst thing to do, is for people to see you and think, oh, this person has no following, and then they're no longer interested. So that's a good point.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to give it a go, it's Podk.it. That's the website, and you can get started for free. And then the premium is only $9 a month. I guess the alternatives for people, just sort of playing devil's advocate here, would be if they created a landing page on their own website with all the information, but would mean that you'd have to constantly update it yourself. And I know a lot of podcasters aren't in the position, or maybe don't have the technical know-how to do that consistently or to make it look good and to work. So for the sake of $9, it might be easier doing something like this for people. And then the other alternative is the old way, like you say, which is where you just put a PDF together with some key information and again, just keep that updated.
Yeah, that's very correct. Now the pricing, because we just recently launched this, we're going to keep it at $9 until we get, I think, the first 500 paid users, and then we'll probably increase the pricing after that. So I would definitely try to check it out now so you can get the lowest pricing that we're going to have ever for this right now, if you can.
Cool. Okay. So just rounding out this sponsors speak. If there was like 3 steps that you'd suggest a podcaster goes on, if they've started to get a bit of a following, maybe 50 to 100 listeners per episode, and they're thinking, right, my following is really niche, it's specific, we've already got that down, I want to start attracting sponsors, or I want to get in front of a networked audience. Are there like 3 steps or 3 to 5 steps that you'd say they need to take to find this sponsor, to pitch to them or convince them, and then if there's anything they need to do with their content, or if there's anything they need to say to their audience once they have got that sponsorship in place?
Yeah, I think the first thing is make sure you have your contact information listed on your show, on your YouTube. Make it easy for somebody to find out how to connect with you, ideally through email. That's just basic. And it's been so difficult sometimes when I've seen a podcast and I want to invite them into my network, and it's been really difficult to try to find out how to connect with them. So that's number one. Include your email address. Feel free to include it like on your Spotify description or in your YouTube channel. The second thing is have a media kit. Be ready. Just in case some potential sponsor reaches out to you, and that's happened to me so many times. I reach out to a podcaster and they don't have a media kit, and they're just not ready. And so you can actually do this with Podk.it if you want, or create your own media kit elsewhere, but be ready. And then the third thing too is if you're just starting out or you don't really have a big audience following, I would reach out to some niche networks that represent the same category of podcasts that you have. Introduce yourself to the network owner or the people there, and share with them information about you and maybe your media kit, and see where that conversation goes. Because like me, it's no risk to the podcaster. They're not exclusive. They can go out and source their own deals. They're not really paying to be in my network. I can't speak on behalf of all other networks. And so there's no risk. I mean, I'm bringing them potentially new revenue, and with sponsors that align with their audience, and there's no work done on their part. I make it very, very simple for them. I can't speak for other networks, but I think approaching other networks that maybe would be interested in representing you would be the third logical choice there.
Nice, thank you for that. Yeah, I think that'd be really helpful. So it sounds like if anyone hasn't even started thinking about reaching out or anything, the first step, just be ready. So you might end up with someone approaching you, and you don't want to be sort of fumbling around. You want to be ready with your contact details, your media kit, and everything.
That's right.
Okay. So just switching gears, we've got a little bit of time left. I just wanted to talk about your podcast, because you're a podcaster yourself. Can you just tell us a little bit about Innovators Can Laugh and why you decided to start it, and sort of how it's changed things for you, how your business has grown because of the podcast?
Yeah, so I moved to Europe a little over 4 years ago from Texas to Romania. Didn't really know anybody, Joe. And I was working at this startup, and there was employees from all over, from India, Turkey, Romania, and a few other countries. And we would get on these calls. And I think of the first call that I got on, as an American, it was very awkward for a lot of people to be on the call, and there was silence. And we were waiting for the founder to jump on, and he hadn't jumped on yet. And everybody was quiet. And so I naturally just started, I think like most Americans, just started talking and asking people questions. And I think one of the questions, just to break the ice, I asked, hey, what's one dish in your home country that your partner or maybe a family member makes and you hate, you totally dislike it? And so it got the conversation going. And the next week I asked another question, and people, this was fun. People were laughing and people were engaged. And the founder was like, hey, Eric, can you open up these meetings for moving forward? But someone made the comment of, God, you should have a podcast. And I thought about it, and I thought this would be a great way to meet other people here in Romania. And so I thought, why not? I'm in the startup space. Let me interview Romanian tech founders. And so that's what I started doing. I really didn't have any good equipment. I used to put pillows around my laptop. I was using Zoom. And it was like that maybe for the first 15 or 20 episodes, but I was having a good time. The guests were really having a good time. And I continued doing that and started interviewing other founders from other European countries. So that's how I got into it, Joe. And I think I interviewed over 130 founders, and every season I try to do a different country in Europe. The other great thing is not only am I meeting these really innovative, interesting people, but now when I travel, I have people that I've interviewed that can kind of show me around their city, if I happen to be there. And that's worked out in places like Barcelona and Paris and Bulgaria and the Netherlands, and it's been fantastic. Just a fantastic way to meet people, and that's how I got into podcasting.
Love that. Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like something that I've been talking about a lot and making content about recently, the prospecting podcast, where it's like, even though obviously it's a great benefit to have a big following, even just the fact that you have a podcast, even before anyone's listened to it, you're already benefiting from just the fact that you're speaking to, potential new collaborators and prospects, just like getting people on an interview that may not have spent 30 minutes to an hour with you if you didn't have the podcast.
Yeah, it's opened up so many doors, and I've got to meet so many people that I probably would have never had the opportunity to meet. And then it opens the doors for new opportunities. I mean, that's how I didn't imagine I'd be creating a network, for podcasts. I didn't imagine I'd be creating a SaaS product or a tool for podcasters, but you never know where life takes you.
Yeah, I can see you've been doing an awful lot of cool stuff in this space, and I like the name as well. Innovators Can Laugh. It's like clear what it's about. That it doesn't take itself too seriously, but also it's quite unique. I couldn't find another podcast with a similar name, which is quite hard in the kind of business and startup space.
Yeah, and it was kind of a mistake because no one is searching on Apple Podcasts for, innovators, right? Innovators Can Laugh. And so from a SEO position, you don't know what you don't know, right? So if I could go back in time, I probably would have a different name. But yeah, it did hurt me from a search engine standpoint. Yeah,
interesting. It's kind of a difficult balance. Like, who do you talk to, the robots or do you talk to the people? Because it's both important to do. Yeah. But something that we've been doing recently is using subtitles. So, for example, we work with a podcast called The Hip, and it stands for the Housing Industry Podcast, but no one's going to be searching for The Hip or Hip when they're searching for stuff in the house. So we've just done The Hip, the Housing Industry Podcast, because Housing Industry Podcast is something really SEO friendly, I think.
Yeah.
And the same with my podcast. It was originally just Podcasting Amplified, but now I've done Podcasting Amplified, the podcast for podcasters. So now I've got podcast, podcasters, and podcasting in the title. So it's hard to sort of track when you see your numbers go up. It's hard to track what change exactly resulted in that, or if it's just sort of general growth. But I like to think that it helped a little bit.
Yep.
And other than the name, just to round things out, is there anything else you wish you'd have done differently at the beginning when you started your podcast that would have made things easier for you?
Well, people always go back and they listen to the first episode if they heard an episode they like. And for me, that bugs me because the first 20 episodes that I think I publish, I think they're, and I'm judging I'm my worst critic, and I think they're awful. Maybe awful from like an audio standpoint, even maybe from a topic or conversation standpoint, and maybe they're not. But I wish I would have put more effort and focus on the first episode and then moving forward. And I didn't really, I try to get better every year or every season to improve. But yeah, the first episode is really, really important. So if you're just into new into podcasting, just keep that in mind, that for whatever reason, they're always going to want to go back and listen to the first episode, and it kills me.
So just start as you mean to go on then, I guess.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your insight, Eric. Thank you for that. So if anybody's interested in taking a look at, again, it's Podk.it, and then the podcast you can find Innovators Can Laugh on your favourite podcast platforms. Is there anywhere else you'd like to send people?
Hey, if they're a B2B podcaster and they're thinking about sponsorships or interested, you can go to b2bpodpros.com. That's our website, and get more information there. So, yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks again, Eric. And wish you all the best with Podk.it and your podcast.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.